when you broke a promise or somebody broke a promise? Have you got a thought in your head? So how, if you made the promise and you broke it, how did you feel? Can yell out how you felt. Guilty? Terrible. If you were the one who the promise was made to and someone broke it, how did you feel? Hurt? Betrayed? Okay, so either way, we all feel bad, right? And so it makes me wonder why we choose to live in dishonesty. And I'm not saying everybody does this all the time, but it is a problem in our world, is living a life of honesty and a life of integrity, right? And when Jesus is preaching this Sermon on the Mount, we have to remember once again, the whole idea is he desires us to flourish. And so last week we spoke about adultery and divorce, and the backdrop to that was there's the cultural story or there's God's story. Which one will we choose to live in? And God's story is a story of where we flourish and we live in his rich abundance and we become the people he created us to be. And we live in that shalom, that peace, that joy and comfort, even in poor circumstances. It doesn't mean we're perfect all the time, but it means we know we have a Savior to whom we can go back to after we've messed up and be forgiven and step back into God's story of flourishing. And so the things like adultery and divorce, that's an outcome of living dishonestly. I mean, it involves all sorts of lies and stealing even and things like that. And so Jesus goes from adultery and divorce into oaths. He wants to lay a foundation once again for us on how we can flourish. And so this passage says this. I'm going to start with the NIV translation of it. It says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." So again, he's pretty clear. Like, we are to keep our promises and our oaths. And we do this so that we can flourish. So last week when I said it was a cultural story versus God's story, today I want to say that in a different way. We can follow the way of the world, or we can follow the way of Jesus. And it is a great struggle. And so I love how Eugene Peterson says the same scripture passage in the Message translation. And he says it this way: "Don't say anything you don't mean. This counsel is embedded deep in our traditions. You only make things worse when you lay down a smokescreen of pious talk saying, 'I'll pray for you,' and then you never do. Or you say, 'God be with you,' but you don't mean it. You don't make your words more true by embellishing them with religious lace. In making your speech sound more religious, it becomes less true. Just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong." So what is Jesus getting at when he's talking about oaths? He says, "Again, you have heard that it was said." And there's a difference there. Previously in other things he's taught, he said, you've heard it's written. He said it's said, which means it's this oral spoken rule or commandment that has come about. So let's go back to the Old Testament for a moment, where Moses came down the mountain with the 10 commandments. And they were pretty basic. Most of them were just one line: don't lie, don't commit adultery, don't covet, don't steal. He was very clear. But over time, because we're human, we would take those the Israelites would take those commandments and start to break them. So then the teachers and the priests would have to make more rules to make it more clear what that one commandment meant. It's like when you own or run an organization and you don't have any policies or procedures. You're just like, we're a great team. We have the same vision. We're unified. We're going to run this thing together and we're going to get along great. But over time, because we're human, we start doing stupid things and we start doing things our own way that are not in line with the overall vision of what the organization or company wanted. And so then all the managers have to get around the board table and they go, so-and-so did this, so now we got to create a policy so that they understand what we meant when we talked about a dress code, or we talked about, that's how dress codes and things come into play. And so Jesus is basically saying here, the 10 Commandments became 613 rules that they are all trying to follow all the time. And they became very complicated and complex. So Jesus, again, he said earlier, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. He's basically saying, there are the commandments. Now you've made it all convoluted and difficult to follow. I'm saying, just keep your promises. You shouldn't have to make oaths and vows if you were honest people. Just be the kind of person who lives an honest and trustworthy life, a life of integrity, and you wouldn't have to deal with all this stuff. And then he goes further to say, when you say, don't swear an oath at all, I'm going to swear by heaven, I'm going to swear by earth or by Jerusalem. See, you know how they couldn't say God's name. It was so holy and reverent. So they would say Yahweh and remove the vowels and everything. So because you didn't want to make a promise or swear in God's name, because there's no way you could break that oath. So when they were saying, I swear by heaven, I swear by earth, I swear by Jerusalem, I swear by my head, they were giving themselves an out. Well, I didn't pray that or swear by that in God's name, so I can break it. And they found a way to manipulate the rules so that it suited them when they couldn't follow through on a promise they had made. But Jesus was saying, God is everywhere. He is omnipresent. Even when you don't use his actual name to make a promise, you're still swearing by his name, because heaven, when you swear by heaven, that's God's throne. He's still involved. When you say, I'm going to swear this by earth, that's God's footstool. Everything in the earth he created, he's still involved. When you say, I swear this by Jerusalem, that is God's holy city, belongs to the king. God is everywhere. And when you say, I will swear by my head, I will do this, he's saying, I created your head. I created the hair on your head. I make it what color it is. Like, you can't do anything or make any promise without me being involved. So quit trying to create an out for yourself. And because God is trustworthy, those of us who say, I follow Jesus, we need to be trustworthy as well, because we are called to become more and more like Christ. And that is countercultural to the ways of the world. The ways of the world, we're all trying to get out of things we promise. We're trying to find the loophole all the time. We see this played out in businesses, in organizations, in everyday life. We're always trying to get out of what we promised to do. We were just talking on the way to church this morning, when you make a cash sale, it's this much if you write a check or use your Visa or whatever, but if you pay me cash, I'll knock off all the tax. You can pay that way. We're always trying to find the loophole. And Jesus wants none of that. He says this is total hypocrisy. Everything belongs to God. He also says this is deep-seated dishonesty. It masquerades theology. It's a deep untruth. It gives the appearance of this serious commitment, but your heart, it's full of deceitfulness. If you say you follow me, if you are going to follow the way of Jesus, You need to be an honest people. Let's get rid of all these oaths and vows and just be honest people with integrity so that the world will look at you and know there's a better way. There is a good way to live. There is a trustworthy way to live. And so that's why he's saying just say yes or no. And if you can't follow through on something, don't say yes at all. Just say no. Because the worst, honestly, is when someone says, yes, I promise I'll do that. And in the back of their mind, they know there's no way they can pull it off, but they just don't want to let you down. So they just say yes to keep things happy. And then they betray you anyway or let you down. I mean, no is hard to hear, but it's way easier to hear than a broken promise. So let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. Dishonesty started in the Garden of Eden when Adam didn't tell God the whole truth. And then it went on from there. Abraham lied to Sarah. Jacob tricked Esau. Joseph's brothers lied to their father about Joseph dying. And it carried on and on and on through all the people in the Bible. And here we are in 2022. And there's still dishonesty everywhere. And every day when we wake up in the morning, we make a choice to follow the way of the world or follow the way of Jesus. And I think if you don't make that an intentional choice every day, you're just going to drift into the way of the world. We talked about intentionality last week. You don't drift into good relationships. You are intentional. And this is another way of being intentional, that I will not follow the way of the world. My business practices will be honest and trustworthy. I will not cheat on my exam today, because plagiarism, cheating on exams, all of that, it's dishonesty. Omitting some of the truth, also dishonest. There's subtle things that seem harmless enough. But when you start to cultivate in those small things, when you're by yourself alone in the dark, that's who you really are. And when you're cultivating dishonesty, it will, like lust, start to become easier and easier and a way of life. We have a nephew who is a very, very sad, tragic story in the backdrop to this. But he had lived with us for a while, and then he went to Alberta to work, and Easter was coming. And so I had gotten in touch with him and I said, hey, are you coming for Easter? And he said, no, I'm staying in Alberta. And so unbeknownst to us, his whole plan was he was absolutely coming back to Vancouver for Easter, but going to his girlfriend's house for dinner instead of our house. And so after the fact, I found out that that's what happened. And I thought, why would he lie about that? That wasn't even a sin, like, to do that, like go to your girlfriend's house instead of ours. But it had become such a way of life. So when I called him out on it, and he was very apologetic, I just said, you are nurturing dishonesty in your life so that now you're lying about things that you don't even need to lie about. There was nothing wrong with you coming into town and going to your girlfriend's house instead of ours. I would have done that too if I hadn't seen them for 4 months, right? It just becomes part of our DNA. It becomes a character trait. You can have an honest character or a dishonest character. But it needs to be intentional, and you need to pay attention to those small things that seem like no big deal. That's where Satan gets you. It's just so subtle. And then it grows and it grows. And all of a sudden, you're living in this way of the world, this corrupt way of doing things. You can't be trusted. You don't have the same integrity anymore. So every day is a choice. Which way will you go? I'm going to stop right there. And I just put a piece of paper on your table. One of you can read it. We're getting short on time. So just take a few minutes to read that out and just discuss what you would do. One more minute. Okay, I'm going to call you back. So I don't know if any of you came up with a very black and white solution, or you found some gray areas that, and we're not going to actually call out our answers because we're running out of time. But the point is, we need to think about these things. Like we go on autopilot and we see the way other businesses run or whatever. We just go and we just follow along and do the same things. And Jesus is saying no to that. He's saying you must be different. We need to be the kind of people. Do we want to be known as hypocrites? Do we want to be known as dishonest people? Do we want to be known as people without integrity? Because right now, where we're living, at the time in history we're living in, I mean, corruption runs thick and deep, and it's just permeated every sector of society. Greed prevails and drives all the decision makings. And so we can tip the scales a little one way or other way, just to, it's not going to hurt anyone. Nobody's going to get hurt. Those people are still going to get paid, but Jesus is saying, no, we need to have integrity. We need to live above reproach. That when you leave a room, people are going to go, there's a person I can trust. We need to set the tone. We need to bring the hope and the honesty and the goodness of this world that God created into every aspect of our life. You see, the Bible permitted oaths, but Jesus calls the whole thing to a stop, and he says, just be honest, and then we won't need these promises and oaths. We will always tell the truth because we are kingdom people. There is no room for dishonesty in God's kingdom. It's hard, right? It's a tough pill to swallow. It might even mean losing a job or losing a position somewhere to stand up for truth and what is right. But do we choose to follow the way of the world or the way of Jesus? Every morning, it's a choice. And I can almost 100% guarantee is if you intentionally say, yes, I follow the way of Jesus every morning when you wake up, you will bump into yourself at some point along the way that day where you got to put this into real life practice. I think Jesus wants to know how serious we are about what we say. Even in our churches, when we say, yes, I follow Jesus, I want to belong to this church, we are saying, I will serve, I will tithe, I will be part of this community through thick and thin. And then we kind of start making some compromises. It permeates everything we do. We have to be mindful. Pay attention. We can't go on autopilot because Satan is just waiting to get a foothold in there. Honesty is grounded in covenant love. God said to his people, I will be your God and you will be my people. And he set the stage right there for the very heart of the demand for honesty, because in relationship, we must be trustworthy people. We don't want to let other people down, right? And we don't want to be let down. How can we love God and others wholeheartedly when we're willing to live in dishonesty? We can't do it. There's a crack in the foundation when we do that, when we think we can have a foot in both worlds. Will you choose the way of the world or the way of Jesus? Will you be a truth teller? Will you be that light in the world where people can look and go, I like how that person does things? I'm going to end with a story. You can leave if you want. Walt doesn't want to be in the room when I tell this story. Walt worked for Tourism Vancouver for close to 16 years and was let go in 2015. They did a reorganization, and people pay the price for that, right? Because it's just business. But his team was devastated, and they wanted to take him out and celebrate him because he'd been a great boss. And so I got invited to the dinner as well. And we went out for dinner, and they were sharing stories around the table about what they loved about Walt, why they loved to work for him so much, because he was available, he was honest, you always knew what you were going to get. He lived with integrity, he spoke with authority, he had a calm presence in the room, and they knew he could be trusted. And one young woman even went so far to say, we've been following you all these years, and we want to be like you as we run our businesses, because many of them have gone into their own businesses after that. We want to run our businesses like you do, because we're kind of like your disciples. And I sat there and went, disciples? That's such a random thing for someone who doesn't know. Am I married to Jesus? Like it was such an odd use of the word for someone who doesn't follow Jesus. But that's how they viewed Walt and how they viewed themselves. Now, I don't want to paint this picture that Walt is so perfect, because you need to get your head through the door on the way out here. But when I was trying to think, who are the people in my life who live with integrity? He is always the first one who comes to mind. What you see is what you get. And he is reliable and steadfast and honest. And I think this is the kind of people that God is asking us to be. He's not asking us to be perfect. He's asking us to be faithful. Faithful to him and a faithful witness to the way of Jesus. Can we do that? I'd like just to end with a prayer that I read on the Lectio 365 app, which is a great app if you're looking for morning and evening prayers. I just would like to pray this over all of us today. Let's bow our heads. Jesus, we choose again the path of an apprentice, because we are always learning. We are still learning. Teach us how to love you with all our minds, all our hearts, all our bodies, and all our strengths. Help me to imitate and include you as we plan our diary, write our to-do lists, waste time on our phones, and even as we walk through our neighborhoods, shape our lives around prayer, mission, and your unforced rhythms of grace. Amen. I love the unforced rhythms of grace. So when we do mess up, we can come to our Father and ask forgiveness.